AM 1460, the new WXBR. You're listening to the Metro South Morning Show. Peter Czymbor and Mike Paiva here with you on a Tuesday morning. Hashtag PM in the AM if you wish to opine on anything that we're chatting about on Twitter. And remember, you can follow us on Twitter at PM in the AM Boston. Mike, you and I have discussed on the airwaves before that when we would do radio remotes at the old station and when we bump into people who are inquiring about the new station, one of the main questions we get is always what?
How's Charlie doing?
How's Charlie doing? Charlie, of course, being Charlie Bergeron, a man who spent 21 years of his life hosting what ultimately became the Metro South Morning Show, the early incarnations of the morning drive programs here on AM 1460, dating back to the days when the call letters were WBET. And we finally said, you know what? How's Charlie doing? The best way to find out is to ask him himself. So joining us now in studio is the man, the myth, the legend, Charlie Bergeron. Charlie, how are you doing?
I'm fine. Thanks for asking.
Charlie, what are you up to these days? I know folks can hear you from time to time, or more than time to time, it seems lately, on the mothership, if you will, the big Boston station on the AM dial on the weekends. What's keeping you occupied these days?
Most of what I'm doing now is I work at South Shore Hospital in Weymouth. And I work primarily as a trainer when we have new employees. There's a lot to learn. And in a nutshell, without getting into it too much, that's my full-time endeavor. As you mentioned, I work in Boston a lot of weekends at the 50,000-watt flamethrower and do a lot of other freelance work in the media as well.
You signed off your morning show August of 2004, so it's been nearly a decade since you've spent any time in studio on the morning program here on 1460 on the AM side of the dial. It must make you feel good that nearly a decade removed from you being in that position, people still ask us about you fairly regularly. You were a part of their lives for a long time.
I don't understand it. I really don't. I mean, it's flattering, it's nice, but life goes on. You guys are picking up the ball. I think I will always have a place for local radio, always, forever. It's disappeared in our general area. It's gone in Quincy. It's gone in Taunton. It's still very alive in Marshfield, and now it's back here after the 7 months that you guys were off. And I really sincerely hope it goes in a big way because the community needs it.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but save for a one-off Boxers basketball game, I believe it was Vic Ortiz's final game or some milestone within his career, you have not been heard on AM 1460 since you signed off in 04.
I don't think so. I'm trying to remember when I stopped doing football, and I, honest to God, don't remember.
Did you continue doing football even after you signed off the morning show?
I think I did, but if someone told me I hadn't, Bill Carpenter would probably know better than I. And I might have just given it off to him when I left in August. I don't remember if that year I stayed or if I just gave it, not gave it to him, but I recommended him to continue to do it. The more I think about it, maybe that was the last time in August of 04. I don't think I did any football after that.
Some people may not realize, even some of the people that ask us about you frequently when we bump into them in public, they think of you as the morning radio guy here on AM 1460 for 21 years. You were far more than just the morning radio guy. You were the morning radio host. You were the general manager of the station, at least for some times towards the end, and you did play-by-play for Brockton Boxers football, basketball, and hockey. You wore a lot of hats on WBET back in the day.
That's what made it fun, because anyone in management will tell you that that's where most of the headaches are. The fun part was the morning program, the interaction with the different people that I worked with, going out to do the games at night. Admittedly, there were some nights when you've been going from early in the morning. If you could snap your fingers and be there, it would have been a little bit easier. But the rides out to Leominster and out to Fitchburg to do football, primarily with Bill Carpenter, especially toward the end, was fun. It was fun. You're out doing something that you liked to do, something you'd probably go to anyway, and now you're doing a little work with it as well.
Mike and I have more or less both agreed with another. We're going to do the fun parts of radio and let everyone else handle this at this new WXBR, this new station. Right, Mike?
That's the way to do it.
That's the way to do it. We're going to come in 6 to 9 and have some fun in the morning, and everyone else can take care of the business at hand. 9 years removed from doing this, do you miss it? Of course, you still do your freelance gigs, But do you miss it?
I think I would miss it a lot more if I wasn't doing anything else. But between what I do in Boston, what I do over at Stonehill College, I still do their football and basketball games. I do some work down in Providence with hockey. When my friend Mike Logan is doing TV, I step in and do the radio. If I wasn't doing all of that, I know I would miss it. But right now, because my time is so limited, I don't. I really thought when I left, I think there was a little withdrawal, but you just get over it because the situation at the time, it wasn't something I wanted to be a part of. So that made it a little bit easier. But, would I go back into local radio? I guess if the opportunity were right, I would certainly consider it. But right now, that's just not the way it is.
When you left in 2004, it came as a surprise to a lot of people as you'd been there for 21 years previously. What ultimately made you decide that you wanted to move on to a new chapter in your life?
It was primarily, at the time, the ownership. I liked the person who was the owner. It was the person that he put in charge that I did not like. And we really honestly didn't get along. And the demands became almost to the point, in my opinion, of ludicrous. And as I told you before we get started today, there was just one day where I finally said, this is not going anywhere. This is silly. And it's time to move on. And also at the time, the trend was certainly from, we had the two stations. We had WBET, we had WCAV. The FM station got sold off. There was significant staffing cutbacks. And it wasn't radio the way I learned it from the 70s and the 80s. It wasn't a people business anymore. Like you just said, you and Mike, we're going to have fun. It was getting to the point it wasn't fun anymore. It was becoming just a business, and it wasn't the way I wanted to see it go.
And we should reiterate to people listening right now that you were more than just the morning host. You were the general manager. You were wearing a lot of hats, and when you had to deal with that person directly in charge, more so than just the morning show, it was things outside of the realm of 6 to 9, or then I believe 5:30 to 9, that you just didn't want to deal with at that point.
Exactly, and that's what it came down to. I was disappointed to come to that conclusion, but it was definitely the right conclusion. And local radio, as we know it, has dramatically changed. I think it's so hard for a local station to be successful now because of the investment, the time invested. You got to go out and knock on doors to make a business work today. And I don't know anything about this ownership, with all due respect, but they need to be able to do that. People aren't going to call in. I mean, some will and say, I'd like to advertise. But you got to let people know you're there, especially when you haven't been here for 7 months. From what I'm hearing, the word is getting out, which is terrific. You've been a part of the city for a long time, so I'm sure you're being a part of that. But it all comes down, the bottom line, it comes down to revenue. And you got to generate that revenue to be able to make it all work.
We'll talk a little bit more about some of the trends in radio and local radio in particular as we continue on. But let's get a little nostalgic for a moment. What are some of your best memories of working for AM 1460 for the 21 years that you were in charge of the morning program?
Really and truly the friendships that I took away from it, that I still have, without question. A lot of funny things, a lot of crazy stuff that went on. But really, I thought about that on my way over today. What was it? And it was really the friends that I made. You're one of them. We've known each other for a long time. That's everything to me. Friendships are everything to me, whether it's professionally, personally, academically, whatever the case may be.
People might not know this, but Charlie Bergeron was in charge of WBET when I got hired just a few weeks after my 16th birthday to produce the Stumbling Bumbling College Football Show, which aired during Thursdays during college football season. So thank you for getting me involved in radio.
That's right. And now look where you are now. So and it's all moving forward. It's all in a good thing. I think it's great. I really do. And I really and truly hope this thing flies. And I think it will. You got to have people that are into it. You and Mike are clearly into it. I sensed that when I walked in the door. That's a good thing.
Is there any particular on-air moments that stand out? We had Steve Mason on a few weeks ago who held the seat, metaphorically, that we're sitting in now following you leaving WBET in 2004, and he referred to some radio remotes he used to do on his front lawn, of all places, and things like that. Is there anything that stands out in your mind unique like that?
Well, this predates you.
Okay.
But the blizzard of '78.
All right.
We were here, the people that were here on the staff at the time we were here for 6 days, day, night. And again, it was back in a time prior to the technology, no cell phones. People were calling at all hours of the day and night. We were on 24 hours. Didn't know where loved ones were because they were stuck out on the expressway. It was really bad the first few days, but it was something I think we were really proud of because I want to say there were maybe 4 of us, and it was just 4 of us for 6 days being on the air 24 hours a day. So we would sleep for a couple of hours, cat nap, be on the air for 6, 8, 10 hours, whatever it was. We were getting all the information out to the public from the community, whether it was the police or the fire or the folks on a higher level, because it was just such a horrible situation. That I will always remember because we really did what local radio was all about. People counted on us, and I really believe it that we came through for them at that time.
Mike and I have laughed a few times over the past week. 7 years removed, you can finally talk about certain things that have happened in the past at the radio station. We had a newsman that used to sleep on the couch that had been there for God knows how long at the WXBR studios. This is after it became WXBR from WBET. And he just worked himself into such a frenzy. Ultimately, he went crazy and resigned with a resignation letter that included 36 exclamation points because, yes, I did count and littered the station with them. I hope that you never found yourself near that edge.
No, I never did because it was still fun when you really come right down to it. It was just, the whole thing was a great experience. It really and truly was. And I'm still dumbstruck that people miss me.
My first time hosting the morning program was when I was filling in for Steve Mason. Steve Mason had previously been a fill-in for you on the morning show the last few years that you did the morning show. When he took over for you, he had some vacation time. They needed somebody, so they had me do it at the age of 17. And I get into that studio at 5:30 in the morning, and I'd never really hosted a radio show before, but I was honored that they felt they had enough confidence in me to do it. Maybe Dick Masterlian didn't care. I don't know. But as I flip on that mic switch, and all of a sudden I'm talking in a room by myself at 5:30 all alone, trying to sound chipper and trying to sound as if I'm talking to thousands of people, now it's like putting on a hat to me. At the time, it was a very unique feeling. It's still dark outside. It's dark in the studio. And I'm talking in a room by myself to thousands of people, but it feels like I'm talking and there's no one in the room. It was very bizarre.
I had a friend of mine going back a few years ago at another station was going to do I think it was a 2-hour talk show. And I said to him, he asked me for some advice, and I said, you've got to be super, super prepared because if you're starting a program, you're expecting to get calls. No one knows you're on. You're going to be doing the whole thing yourself. He called me after the show was over, and he said after 20 minutes I was gassed because he thought he had prepared enough. But to do that type of job, I always used to come in a good hour and 15 minutes before the program, read 3 newspapers, go through the wire service. Again, this was predating the internet and the ability to kind of pull stuff up now and grab
We still
stuff.
had the wire service towards the tail end of WXBR. You remember that machine, right, Mike?
I wasn't around for that.
You don't remember the wire
No.
machine?
I
Oh, it would
missed
freeze, it wouldn't
Charlie
work.
by
Oh, yeah.
months.
Yep.
Very few months.
But you had to be prepared to make it work. I don't have the capability of just talking off the top of my head all the time. And people don't want to hear that. You always try to think, what does the listener want? So, we always just try to keep them informed, and we tried to have a little fun at the same time.
Another anecdote about my first time filling in on the morning show that I'll never forget was maybe about 45 minutes into the show. And our format, I think, has deviated a tad here with Mike and myself. It's not quite... You stick with weather, news, traffic, the staples. We've deviated a slight. One of the first things me and Mike said to each other was, we're not going to give out the school lunch. No one's listening for the school lunch. And teaching in high school now, I know that there's not one option anymore for school lunch. These kids almost have an entire menu to choose from. We're not going to go through it each and every day. But one thing that I will never forget about my first time on the air at WBET in the morning program, about 45 minutes in, the phone lights up during a commercial break. Some older gentleman, I could tell he was older by his voice, asking me why I had not given out the lottery numbers just yet. And it had just slipped my mind. And he was like, I need to know the lottery numbers. I'm like, I'm sorry, I'll get right on that, buddy. And he said, Charlie Bergeron would never forget the lottery numbers.
Again, you got used to doing certain things. You found out what people wanted, and if you gave that to them, then all was good with the world. And it's a trial and error thing for you guys now, because you're just coming out of the box after 7 months out. Big difference. We had time to learn all that.
Now, during your time away from 1460, first off, did you still continue to listen to the station after you were gone, or were some scars still there where maybe you didn't listen
No,
as much?
I definitely did, because a lot of my friends still worked there. What my issue was between me and someone else who was involved in upper management. So, no, I absolutely did. And for years I did, because, again, a lot of my friends were still part of what was going on. So that was fine with me. And I was so disappointed when it didn't work out even then. And you mentioned Dick Mazzurlian. I don't know if there's many people that I enjoy their being with more. You talk about a character. Well,
Oh, yeah.
he used to do some things with people that came into the station that was just hilarious.
Mike's got a favorite Dick Mazzurlian prank that we saw him do repeatedly. Do you remember
My
when?
favorite is telling people to bang 4 lefts
Yes,
to go to the
exactly.
bathroom.
That was one of my favorites too, Mike. He would tell people take 4 lefts and they'd come right back around to where you were. And the other thing he always did was he asked people if they wanted ice cream.
Yes.
And we didn't have any ice cream. And I just wanted once for someone to come in and say, I would love to have an ice cream, just to see what he would do.
First day I worked there, I'm signing tax papers, and behind you, he's asking me all these questions about where I lived and how he knew where I lived, and he was friends with my father and all this stuff. And I'm thinking to myself, really? and he turns around, and I looked at you. I gave you a very quizzical look, and you gave me a look to indicate, Petey's full of it. Just play along.
I shook my head a lot when I was the third person in on a conversation with Dick, because I knew he was full of it, and the other person didn't, and I would try to convey that. But I love Dick Mazzurlian. He's down in Rhode Island doing some other things now too, and actually we just exchanged emails yesterday. So that goes back to what I said earlier. The people that worked here before are the people that I really miss, and life gets in the way. You want to get together with people, sometimes it just doesn't work out.
Once again, we're chatting with Charlie Bergeron here on AM 1460, the new WXBR, a man who spent 21 years of his life hosting the morning program on AM 1460, then known as WBET. What were your thoughts on not just listening to 1460 in the years that you left, but following along with the industry? I'm sure that you saw, well, you mentioned earlier, you saw local radio declining to the point of non-existence in a lot of local areas. You mentioned Taunton, for example. Our friends at PEP, they're non-existent anymore as far as I know.
Right.
A lot of places went away.
Quincy, I had great friends that worked up at WJDA in Quincy. I think they're still in business, but it's a whole different format now. So it's not local radio, which is the way I look at it. Here, where you are in Brockton, you're halfway between Boston to the north, Providence to the south, and Worcester to the west. So to be able to generate the advertising revenue, the bigger dollars, the Coca-Colas, that the Walmarts of the world, you can't get them because the bigger markets are surrounding you. And that was always a real frustration that we had as management to try to get that money. Now you're counting on the local guy. Well, the local guy isn't there as much as they were 5 and 10 and 20 years ago because the bigger companies have taken them over. That's where local radio just doesn't have a niche in some markets because they can't generate the revenue to sustain their business. And that's the part that's just disappointing.
After a few years of you leaving, WBET became WBZB for a few hours. We got a nice little letter from the Friends of the Mothership that said cease and desist. For a few hours we were nothing. We reverted back to being WBET. Ultimately we became WXBR. There were a few shifts in ownership, and I noticed towards the end of your tenure, the beginning of my tenure, you could go into the WBET offices and there was a sales staff. There was some activity, and slowly but surely over the years, it seemed like activity within those offices was dwindling and dwindling and dwindling. What were your thoughts on what was happening to WXBR as a business towards the tail end of, we'll say, its initial run?
It was failing. Simple as that. Again, you can have an all-star lineup. This is the part of the business that always confuses me, that people put the cart before the horse. you can have two great co-hosts, you can have a great talk show, you can have whatever it is, but ultimately, if you don't have that person, as I said before, out in the marketplace promoting who you are and getting that revenue to come in, how do you get paid? You know, this is not Channel 2. It's not public broadcasting, it's private. And I don't know really much about what's going on here now, but if you don't have that local sales force, and they're competing with everybody else, you're the new guy on the block now, even though the station's been here since 1946. To generate that new revenue again is going to be the challenge of the new ownership. But that's what was happening. The ownership prior was not putting any substance into their sales and marketing. You can't do that. It's not going to sell itself.
Literally for about a year of the old station's existence, I was not involved at all in the radio station. As a matter of fact, I can't remember the last time I was even in the studios of the old WXBR, WBET studios at 60 Main Street. I think it may have been just an off invite I received from Dick Massilian or someone there telling me that I could come to the Christmas party, which was held there annually in December. I was sort of a little bit dejected from the whole experience. I saw it for what it was towards the end, and I didn't see the station going really anywhere. What were your feelings when new ownership came in and purchased it and realized, well, we've got a lot of mess to clean up. Let's go on a little bit of a hiatus and come back even stronger. What were your thoughts?
I just thought that every day that they're off the air is going to be every day on the other end times 3 that it's going to take to build it back up again. Because just like anything, if it's gone, I'll use myself as an example. I'm listening to WXBR. The station goes away, and it's a couple of days. Well, I'll find something else to do. A couple of weeks, boy, I wish they'd come back. A couple of months, my interests have gone. Now you got to win me back again, and that's going to be the challenge that you and Mike have. You got to win those people back. How many of those people know you're here? That's the issue. How do you get that word out? I don't know. But that's going to be the challenge for a local radio station to rekindle that local interest once again.
I want to pick your brain a little bit more on this subject. We're chatting with Charlie Bergeron here on AM 1460, the new WXBR, a man who is morning show host here on AM 1460 for 21 years. Mike, we'll step aside for a quick breather. We'll do a look at local news, weather, and traffic. Of course, we're following that big story from yesterday at the Boston Marathon. Unfortunately, there was some explosions at the finish line well after the elite runners had finished, but a lot of injuries and a few casualties as well. So we will step aside for a quick news break. We'll be back. We'll chat more with Charlie Bergeron here on AM 1460, the new WXBR. AM 1460, the new WXBR. Peter Czymbor and Mike Paiva here with you on a Tuesday morning, joined in studio by a very special guest, the man who was in charge of the morning show for 21 years at WXBR before signing off for WBET. I'm so used to saying XBR at this point. We'll say he was the morning man at 1460 for 21 years before signing off in 2004. Charlie Bergeron. Mike, we finally have an answer for when people ask us at radio remotes and we bump into them in public, how's Charlie doing? He's seemingly doing great.
He's doing fantastic.
He's doing fine.
Well, Charlie, you were in charge of the morning show for 21 years, in charge of the station more or less for 21. Were you the GM for all 21 years? You were the morning host?
No. Again, it's kind of foggy. But no, I was a program director, and then the person who was in charge, who was the general manager, station manager, whatever the title was, left, and then I started doing that. I want to say 89. Let me think back for a second. My son was born in 1989, 91. So it was not, I want to say 13 years, maybe something like that. I was the station manager. Prior to that, I was the director of programming.
Long enough. I think towards the end of the old station's existence, general manager, program director, all that stuff kind of filed under one heading.
It was all titles to me anyway. It didn't matter. The person who ultimately had to make a decision was the station manager. So that's who I guess I was.
Well, let me ask you this. You were morning show host for 21 years. Mike and I have been doing it for, 5 weeks now?
Yeah, this is our 5th week.
This is our 5th week doing the morning show. Our bodies are starting to get adjusted to waking up this early, which is a more major adjustment than I originally thought it would be, to tell you the truth. Friends call me at 8 o'clock now, and I'm going to bed, man.
Yep.
Going to sleep. What advice do you have for us as we enter this tenure? We're 5 weeks into it. What advice do you have for us?
Prepare, and prepare some more, because your life experiences, you know when something that you do is something that other people can relate to. So you kind of file that stuff away, because people want to relate to what's going on. I can't tell you how many times over the years, relating to something that I did or saw or heard about, and people would call and say, man, you hit the nail right on the head. That happened to me last week, or I've never heard of that. That's interesting. Preparation in a morning program, to me, is everything. It really is. If you do that, you will be a little sleep deprived, but you won't mind.
Let me ask you this, and tell me if this is on us, or if maybe this is just some preconceived notion of the listener. But Mike and I get a fair amount of good, positive feedback on this program via outlets like Twitter, Facebook, social media. Mike are you in your early 30s or late 20s, Mike?
Early 30s.
Early
Pete.
30s.
Thanks.
Sorry, Mike, you're 30 now. I'm in my mid-20s. Mike and I's life experience certainly skews a lot younger than what has been the traditional demographic for people who listen to this radio station. What advice do you give us in order to relate to a universal audience?
Again, I think it's really more, especially with something that's been gone for 7 months. I don't know what you guys have been doing, but one of the things that we did years ago was we would ask the listener. We used to do a segment on one of the talk shows where we would have the station manager, the general manager, the program director in, and let listeners call in and say, what do you want us to do? And far and away was be local. Don't try to be regional. Be a local station. Be Brockton, be West Bridgewater, be Stoughton, whatever the case may be. And that will bring the listener, whether the listener is 17 or 70, people want to know what's going on in the local schools. They want to know what's going on. You got a big political race coming up in the fall. People relate to that thing. I think ages means nothing when it comes to something like that. So give them what they want. And again, I think in this market, the market has certainly changed over the years since I've been here. But ultimately, people want something that they can't get from anywhere else, which would be local.
Mike, there's a funny anecdote that you shared on the airwaves earlier during the week. Sometimes we share things from our personal lives just for our own humor and to amuse the audience. Tell this one since Charlie's here. Your Nana's friend.
Oh, we do get our share of good criticism, and we do get our share of some constructive
But this
criticism.
one was great because it directly involves Charlie.
This was fairly harsh, and basically we were told that we were quite boring in the
Your
morning.
voices are
that
boring.
our voices are boring. And it's
You should have more of a voice like Charlie Bergeron.
Yeah, that's where it led to eventually.
Really?
Yes.
Well, again, you're always going to get that person or persons. I mean, God knows, over the years, I had people who I would do something and would say, you are awful. Okay, thanks for calling. The difference was, it wasn't, sometimes it was on the air. Sometimes it was off the air. I can't believe you said that. You're a fool. Okay, thanks for calling. At least you're listening.
I just love this one because it all came back to Charlie Bergeron.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many anecdotes that you will compile over the years, things like that, but they'll be dwarfed by the things that are good, and that's what keeps you going.
Once again, we're chatting with Charlie Bergeron here on the Metro South Morning Show on AM 1460 WXBR. 21 years as morning show host here on AM 1460. Many of those years was also the program director, general manager, a man who was in charge of more or less everything at AM 1460 when it was known as WBET. Let's talk about some of the people that you hired that are still with us here at WXBR. We mentioned that you hired me when I was 16 years old earlier. Thank you so much for that. Just a few weeks into my 16th birthday in 2003, junior in high school. Felt really cool to know that I was filling in hosting shows. And my school teachers were like, Peter, was that you? Yes, it was. Extra credit? It didn't work out so well, but it was kind of cool. Let's talk about Ron Van Dam. You brought Ron Van Dam over from, and we'll talk about how the market has changed. There was a time when there was 2 radio stations in the greater Brockton market, shall we say.
Right.
Ron was at the other station. You brought him to WBET.
Right. And we had a lot of people. We were, at the risk of sounding contrite, the better of the 2 stations at the time. We had a better signal. We had better programming. And we would get inquiries from folks over there who wanted to come to work with us. And Ron was by far the best of the bunch. So we had a need at the time for someone to do a talk show, and I think it's great that he's still doing it.
That was the Newsline program.
Yes.
Which aired in the 9 to 11 time slot, which is where Ron still is to this day. When you hired Ron, he was probably best known for not only his work at the other station, but hosting a late-night talk show that aired all over the South Shore called Another Night. That was a talk show with a comedic twist. When you hired him to host the Newsline program, he had to be more of a serious, topical news discussion moderator. I would venture and say that within a few months of Charlie leaving, Ron started to loosen up a little bit more from the serious news moderator that you hired.
Probably, because I know he and I had that conversation about I need someone to do a news talk program. Part of that is to entertain because, again, you have to be able to relate to the audience, which I always thought he did. He clearly did. But I know his background was more in entertainment/comedy. And I know there was a time or two where I think I might have spoken to him and said, you're kind of tipping that way. And he was great. He was always, yep, either you're right or maybe I disagree with you, but I'll be aware of it. So it was, he did what we wanted. But you're right. I think what his niche was probably maybe I took him out of it.
Ron Van Dam, a lot of people might not know, you talked about his comedic background, was a comedy writer for the Dick Cavett Show, which, when did the Dick Cavett Show air? 60s, 70s?
Oh, God, that's back in got to be the 70s.
Yeah, 70s. I don't remember the Dick
Just
Cavett
guessing.
Show.
Yeah, that's way, way before you guys.
You ever remember the Dick Cavett Show, Mike?
No. Sorry, Pete.
I see it sometimes referenced on.
But I
old
guarantee
VH1
you there are
shows.
people listening right now that are nodding, going, "Oh, the Dick Cavett Show, sure."
One of the best caller response we've ever got here on the Metro South Morning Show, which is odd because it's not really a caller-based show, as you know, from the many years that you did it. We started talking about an episode of The Brady Bunch a few years ago, and it was the first episode of The Brady Bunch I ever saw as a kid, and it made me really not like The Brady Bunch for a long time. It was the famous episode where they go to Hawaii, the boys get kidnapped, tied to trees, and somehow at the end of the episode they're friends with them and the family's having a campfire. As a kid, I could not believe that this was actually on television. I was like, why isn't someone not reporting this to the police? But I digress. I got over that, and I now can enjoy the campiness of the Brady Bunch. But I was shocked. People just kept calling, talking about their favorite episodes of the Brady Bunch. And like I said, we're not even really a caller-based show.
But that goes back to relating to the listener. You hit on a nerve that they want to talk about. I mean, a perfect example will be what's going on in the news now at the marathon. People will always remember where they were, what they saw, what they heard about that, and they could relate to either a friend. I know for a fact that I have texted over the past number of hours with folks who either I knew used to run the marathon or did, and I was just sending them a text message, are you okay? Because I didn't know where they were, and thank God they all texted back, yeah, everything's good. It's, again, that relationship. You hit on something that a person can relate to. When you get the host that has an agenda that nobody else cares about, that's when you have problems.
Once again, we're chatting with Charlie Bergeron here on AM 1460 WXBR. Charlie, we asked you what advice you had for us as new morning show hosts here at WXBR. What advice would you have for new ownership of the station and new management? Like we talked about, the station was off the air for 7 months. During that time, the station changed ownership, changed management, changed studios, and quite honestly, the new studios were much needed. When we came to the new studios here on 250 Belmont Street as opposed to 650 or 60 Main Street, it was like that scene in The Wizard of Oz where it goes from black and white to color. Everything worked suddenly and was not held together with clarinet reeds and bubblegum. What advice do you have for new ownership and new management?
I think it's something that we've already touched on, is be local and get out and let people know you're there, because it just doesn't happen by itself. But really, more than anything else, the programming is important, but I remember over the years listening. I'd be in New Hampshire and put on, I was into the local radio. What are they doing that we could do better? That type of thing. And you would hear programming that was honestly abysmal. But then you'd hear a spot break with 6 commercials, and I'm saying, how does that happen? Because they were out in the community, and everybody knew they were there, and everybody wanted to be part of it. That's the challenge that you and Mike and Ron and other folks are going to have. Get everybody back on board as being a community radio station. And that takes a long time. I mean, we were established when I was here in the 70s and 80s and 90s because we had a track record. Now that track record is it's like the track broke, and now you're trying to put it back together again, and you have so much competition with social media, as an example. How do you beat that? You just got to bang on doors and let people know who you are.
I was just going to ask you about that. Media has changed so much since 2004. Obviously, the internet was around then, but it has become such a more prominent part of people's lives. How is the media? How's the change in the way people access media affected local radio, in your opinion?
Oh, I think it's a detriment, because if you can access a local newspaper, as an example, again, something you and I talked and Mike talked about during one of the breaks was you guys are really focusing on local news, and I think that's what will bring a lot of people back. But I know one thing that was huge when I was here 15, 20 years ago was when it snowed. Everybody wanted to know if there was going to be school. Well, with the advent of the crawl on the bottom of a television screen now, people don't call local radio stations to see if there's school in Brockton. They turn their television on and they wait for it to crawl across the bottom of their screen. No school in Brockton, no school in Easton, or whatever the case may be. I welcomed that at the time because that was the biggest headache, was dealing with all the no school announcements. It was very hard. Plus you had all the people that would call because, God forbid, I'm not going to listen to the local radio station. I'm just going to call and they're going to personally service me. I never did. I always said, I have no idea if there's school or not. You'll have to listen to the station. Oh, I don't have time for that. And neither do I to talk to you about this either. So see you later. But the technology, we're a USA Today world now. We want a little bit of this. We want a little bit of that. We don't want to sit and focus on anything. To be a good local radio station, you got to be a little bit of this and a little bit of that. You got to serve the city of this city and the communities around it to make it fly.
Mike and I were discussing weeks ago when we got offered the position to be host of the Metro South Morning Show. With the advent of social media and the prominence of internet, it plays in people's daily lives nowadays, that if we had a good segment, we had a good interview. For example, yesterday we had Uda Pippig on the show, who won the Boston Marathon 3 consecutive years in the 90s. We're not just going to interview her and let it air once and be done. We'll put it online so it has a second shelf life. We call it the Jimmy Fallon effect, because I think he does a very good job at appealing to two different demographics with his late night program and then posting it again on YouTube the following night.
And that makes sense, because when you build something, there's been plenty of times that over the years when I worked here that we would do something and I would get calls about it. Hey, you had so-and-so on the other day. Yeah, gee, you going to ever replay that interview? Well, we never taped anything. No, it's gone. Forget it. Well, you're going to have this person on again? Well, we'll try. You have to be able to do what you guys are doing, to be able to have it come back again is terrific. I mean, that's an advantage of social media, without a doubt.
Well, Charlie, I want to thank you so much for coming in this morning, spending some time with us here on the radio. Mike, perhaps that lady who said that, why can't you be more like Charlie Bergeron, maybe she'll feel more comfortable with liking our radio stylings now that she knows that we sort of have the endorsement of Mr. Bergeron right here himself by appearing on our program.
We can only hope, Pete.
We can only hope, Charlie. Hopefully we get the Charlie Bergeron rub, as I guess it will be known.
Well, let's hope so. You don't need it, but so be it.
Charlie, any final words for our listeners this morning as WXBR moves forward into its new existence, shall we say?
I just hope, there's strength in numbers. I just hope folks who are listening to the station tell people that the station is back. Once that groundswell continues and you guys provide them the necessary programming, I think, I think it can be very, very successful. And I really and truly, for the sake of local radio, hope it is.
There was an outcry when WXBR went away, and I just hope that there isn't any bitterness or resentment from a lot of those old listeners as we come back, and I hope that we're winning them back slowly but surely. Some of them jumped right back in as soon as we came on. Others, I think, felt a little bit neglected, even if,
Yeah, absolutely. And I can see how they would, but they don't know the background behind it and what happened. But, you're back again, and let's just hope there is no interruption from this point forward.
I hope you had fun today.
I did. It was great. Thanks for having me.
Feel a little bit nostalgic being behind the microphone in Brockton again?
Feels kind of weird, really, because it's just so different from what I was used to. This is obviously a different, brand new facility, which is really nice. And but it was, it would be a blast to get a bunch of us in someday and just turn the microphones on and just get out of the way.
Perhaps that's something we can do. It's too bad we don't have the old Doc Jones radio board anymore.
No, you're probably better off without that. That's going back to, the mid-'70s, I think, when Doc was here.
We're the first radio show in morning show history at 1460, I think, to have ever not used that board. That thing was around forever.
I think you're the first morning show that was not on Main Street.
I believe that is the case as well.
We've been on Main Street since 1946, if I'm not mistaken. I could be actually East Ashland Street it started.
I was going to say, yes.
And then it went to Main Street. So I stand corrected on that. But this is a much better layout.
AM 1460 with a long and storied history, and hopefully that history just continues and the rest is left unwritten, as they say. Charlie Bergeron, thank you again.
My pleasure.
That's Charlie Bergeron joining us here on AM 1460 WXBR on this Tuesday morning. We'll step aside for a quick news break. You're listening to Peter Czymbor and Mike Paiva, PM in the AM. Follow us on Twitter at PM in the AM Boston, and subscribe to us on YouTube, youtube.com/PM in the AM Boston as well. And we'll step aside for a quick break. Back with more of the program after this.